Hey everybody, I'm Katie, and welcome to Head of the Class. I'm joined today by Mrs. Kimberly Jackson, one of Freedom Project Academy's high school history teachers. Mrs. Jackson joined FPA in 2014 and currently teaches world history. She also serves as a tutor for students who need help with the English studies. Mrs. Jackson, we hear that history is boring and it's in the past, so why should we care about it? What drew you into the subject and why you teach our high school students world history?
Well, my history journey actually began when I began homeschooling my children. They had these wonderful little texts called Story of the World, and I hadn't looked at history in that aspect. I looked at it as a drudgery and as a course to take to get through college. But as I began to open Susan Wise Bauer's book and read it to my children, that awakened in me a real love for history.
So you have the responsibility of kind of showing the world to our students. How do you present the history of the world to your students in a virtual classroom?
Well, it's easier than you think. It's interesting because the humanities course at FPA kind of plays into the world history. And so I go about teaching it. We have a weekly lecture over a chapter. We also open up the class with a poll. We just finished studying the Industrial Revolution, the first and second Industrial Revolution. So one of my questions was, what were some of the products that we had during the second Industrial Revolution that we just weren't capable of during the first? And then that leads to other discussions. It's just really interesting to see. You'd think teaching in an online platform would be impersonal, but it's really not. It's really quite an interesting experience to be a part of.
In addition to history, you have a love of English, and you serve as the tutor for the subject for FPA. What does that role entail?
Well, just last week, it's interesting that you should ask. A little girl came to class, and she wanted me to help edit her paper. So sometimes it's editing a paper. Sometimes it's saying, how can we make this paragraph better? How can we show the reader instead of just tell the reader what we're talking about? Also, I don't know, this is pretty old school, but I get a lot of students coming in with diagramming sentences has been the recent help that they've needed. And that's been just a lot of fun. And it awakens a happiness in me because I think, oh, great, students or teachers are still diagramming sentences, which I think is very important.
And reading for English and history probably takes up a lot of your time. But when you get some free time, what do you like to do?
Well, I used to like to run in my 20s and 30s. I don't do that anymore. I've taken up swimming, which is a lot gentler on middle-aged joints. I love to play the piano. I'm trying to learn a piece by Debussy right now. My daughter, who has studied for many years, is actually my piano teacher. That saves some money. And then I love to garden. I just put out my lettuce yesterday.
All right. Well, your teaching experience is more than 2 decades long. Why did you decide to specifically join FPA?
Well, as a new homeschooling mom, I would have never dreamed that I would be homeschooling my children. I was a former public and private school teacher, and that didn't even occur to me. But I was at a homeschool conference in Springfield, Missouri, and I saw the FPA booth, and I began talking to the gentleman there. He was very friendly. I was looking at their flyers, and it just seemed like a really professional organization. And I ended up speaking with Miss Mary Black, and she was just a wonderfully encouraging lady. And I taught for FPA, and what has drawn me in recent years has been the caring. I mean, on November 11th, I received a birthday card. In all my years of teaching, you weren't really valued, but I really feel valued by this organization. I think they really care about their students and their teachers, and I love the high standards and the classical curriculum that FPA uses. So all of those things have really drawn me to FPA.
And before we wrap up, I want to do a quick fire. So answer the following questions as quickly as possible. What are 5 words to describe you?
I have to look down at my notes because this was the hardest one to answer. Loving, kind, sensitive, perfectionist, and adventuresome.
Okay. What are 4 spots that you would like to travel to?
Iceland, believe it or not, Venice, Madagascar to look at all the different species of animals and birds, and then Scotland.
All right. And what are 3 of your favorite books or books you'd recommend others read?
Well, I love To Kill a Mockingbird. It's interesting that Harper Lee, that was the only novel she really ever wrote. Well, she did write another one they found in her attic a few years later. but I love the Southern writers, Faulkner, Welty. I really am a lover of the short story, so I would have to say that there are several short stories, too many to list, that I love.
Okay. How about who are 2 historical figures that you would like to have dinner with?
Definitely Jefferson. I've always wanted to go and visit his home, and it would be nice to sit down to tea with him and talk about music and the arts, and I would like to tour his gardens at Monticello. I would like to see all of those beautiful gardens as they were when he was alive.
All right.
And then, the other historical figure you're getting ready to say is Elizabeth I. She reigned in England for approximately 44 years. And this was a time when women were not rulers. And so I would like to sit down and have a cup of tea. You can tell I like to drink tea with her as well and ask her how she did it. And just find out a lot about that era as well. It interests me.
Okay. And finally, what's one piece of advice you have for your students?
I think the most valuable piece of advice we can teach any student, public, private, homeschool, it doesn't matter the environment. They have to learn to be self-managers. They have to learn to manage their time and themselves. And I think that's the biggest tool that students need.
All right, Mrs. Jackson, thank you so much for being here today. Learn more about our dedicated teachers and Freedom Project Academy at fpeusa.org.